Morning, everyone. And quick question. Have you ever looked at a painting and thought, I don't just see it, but I feel it? That is kind of energy we're diving in today. My name is June, and I'll be introducing you to one of the most personal, emotional, and revolutionary movements in art history, post-impressionism. So, to start off, to understand post-impressionism, we must briefly look back at impressionism. The Impressionists wanted to paint what their eyes could see, such as soft light, fleeting moments, and reflection on the water. But the Post-Impressionists, on the other hand, they wanted to paint what the heart could feel. They turned art from a window of the world into a mirror of the soul. And today I'll show you how three incredible artists, Vincent van Gogh, George Seurat, and Edvard Munch, used visual elements and principles to completely change what painting meant. So the first example is Starry Night by Vincent van Gogh, which I believe is one of the most famous and historical art pieces that reflect post-impressionism. So, looking at this artwork, what do you think is being first emphasized the most here?
The night sky.
You're absolutely right. Most crowds will also find emphasis on either huge cypress tree on the left section of the visual or the huge bright stars in the upper right corner. This creates an asymmetrical balance with opposing visual weights. On the left, there's a large dark tree, and on the right, there's an intensely bright star. Van Gogh demonstrates the idea of opposing forces of balance through a variety of elements. First, will be opposing line types. Vincent van Gogh used curving, swirling, and wavy lines for the sky and rigid vertical lines for the cypress tree, a church, and any other earthly elements. Second, he uses opposing shapes. Circular spiral shapes for the stars, moon, and celestial bodies, and geometric shapes that illustrates the village houses. Van Gogh also uses opposing colors. That is to highlight the shine or the luminosity of the stars. He uses complementary colors like blues and greens for the background and yellows and whites for the stars and moon. Lastly, Vincent van Gogh used different ground levels to create depth in the visual. The foreground is filled with large trees in a village, and the middle ground is filled with mountains and hills, and finally the background is filled with sky and moon and stars. This eventually creates a rhythm that is not uniform, but rather a dynamic emotional flow that guides us, the audience, to experience the atmosphere created by Vincent van Gogh. Finally, through the research, I figured the Starry Night was created with impasto, which means thickly applied paint and had repeated brushstrokes and lines. This emphasizes the dynamic of the artwork and gives a sense of movement that we can see visually. Before I move on, I just want to share one thing that I found interesting. Despite the visual's popularity in modern times, Vincent van Gogh considered this artwork a failure. That was because he thought his experiments and distortions of the piece were disturbing the overall atmosphere of the artwork. The painting was introduced after his death through his brother, and after hearing about this information, I felt like sometimes we human beings tend to consider something as a failure or ugly if it doesn't fit with the standard of the world. However, what we think might be a failure can be a revolutionary piece that represents a specific era, after all. If Van Gogh poured emotion into chaos and movement, the next artist did the opposite. He found emotion through stillness and order. Next up is George Seurat. His painting, A Sunday Afternoon, looks calm and peaceful, right? Yes. But up close, it is made up of millions of tiny dots. This technique is called pointillism, which is a painting with color the way a computer pixel works today. This method provides the overall texture of the artwork and allows the audience to have a better interpretation of light and shadow that is being portrayed in this artwork. Seurat believed emotion could come from precision, from how colors scientifically interact with our eyes. By placing reds beside greens and blues beside oranges, he created energy without chaos. Every detail in A Sunday Afternoon is deliberate, from upright trees to the calm riverbank. As the Art Institute of Chicago explains, this pointillist technique used complementary hues to create harmony through contrast. His painting is created with mixed use of vertical and horizontal lines, and by creating rigid geometric shapes for the figures, in contrast to organic shapes of nature, Surratt creates a symmetrical balance in the artwork. Also, the proportion and scale of the artwork is created with three-dimensional depths. Therefore, if you look farther into the space, figures eventually disappear or diminish into the background. Surratt spent over 2 years dotting this painting, brushstroke by brushstroke, to capture this single quiet moment. We have seen how Van Gogh painted with emotion and Surratt with control. Now imagine if emotion fully takes the lead. No balance, no restraint, just raw human feelings on canvas. This is Edvard Munch's The Scream. When you take a look at this painting, you can almost hear it. The sky twists. The sky twists, bridge tilts, and human face melts into the sound. This piece probably contains the most emotional composition of the artist out of all three examples. This artist suffered from mental illness and was going through a phase of anxiety when he was creating this piece. For this piece in particular, the line plays the most dominant element. Intensely wavy diagonal and swirling strokes that are everywhere in the sky and water that clash with straight, rigid lines of the bridge establish a chaotic and aggressive rhythm. In terms of color, unlike the other artists I mentioned, Munch uses analogous colors, which means colors that are placed side by side in the color chart, like reds, oranges, and yellows, which he used for overall background and figure itself, that contrast with the dark, deep blues of the water. This creates high contrast, which creates the frantic movement flowing through the entire scene. Another notable thing is that the proportion of the human is distorted, and the compressed space makes the foreground figure feel trapped, conveying a feeling of overwhelming anxiety that author was going through. Lastly, the use of impasto in areas, particularly in the sky, makes it stand out physically from the surface, giving depth to the visual and also highlights other thin layers like figure itself. And all these elements and principles carry the tension of unstableness and anxiety that directly reflect the emotional status of artists at the time. So, what connects these three artists? They all lived in the same era, and they all looked at the same world, but each presented a different truth. Together, they showed that art isn't just about what we see, but it's about what we feel. Post-Impressionism wasn't just a style, it was a reminder that every brushstroke carries a heartbeat. So next time, when you see a painting, don't just ask, what is it? Ask what it entails and what it is saying. Because art, like people, always has more beneath the surface. Thank you.